Welcome to my channel. Have you ever wondered how a young girl who never expected to be queen ended up becoming one of the most famous and longest ruling monarchs in history? What made Queen Elizabeth so special that the whole world paused when she spoke and millions cried when she passed away? Stay with me, because today we will discover the real story behind Queen Elizabeth. A queen who saw war, peace, family drama, and more. This is not just history. This is a story of power, duty, and grace. Chapter 1. A princess who was never supposed to be queen. Once upon a time, in a world filled with castles, royal dinners, and elegant traditions, a little girl named Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor was born on April 21st, 1926. She was born into royalty, yes, but she was never expected to become the queen. In fact, when she was born, no one imagined that this quiet little girl with bright eyes and curly hair would one day become one of the most famous and longest ruling monarchs in the world. Elizabeth was the first daughter of Prince Albert, the Duke of York, and Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. Prince Albert was the second son of King George V, which meant he was not first in line to the throne. The crown was supposed to go to his older brother Edward. So Elizabeth, or Lilibet, as her family called her, lived a fairly private life for a royal child. She played with her toys, read books, and spent time with her younger sister, Princess Margaret, who was born in 1930. The two sisters were very close. They would dress in matching clothes, put on plays for their parents, and play games in the garden. Life was full of love, but it was also full of rules. Even though she wasn't expected to become queen, Elizabeth's parents made sure she had a proper and disciplined upbringing. She was educated at home, like many royal children at the time. She studied history, language, literature, and even music. Her favorite subjects were horses and dogs, a passion she carried with her for the rest of her life. But her lessons weren't just about books. From a young age, she was taught how to behave like a member of the royal family, how to speak, how to sit, how to smile, and how to greet people with kindness and grace. But then came a twist, a royal twist that would change everything. In 1936, when Elizabeth was just 10 years old, her grandfather, King George V, passed away. His eldest son, Edward, became King Edward VIII. But something shocking happened. Edward wanted to marry a woman named Wallis Simpson, an American who had been divorced twice. At the time, the Church of England did not allow a king to marry someone who had been divorced. The country was in crisis. The people were confused. The royal family was shaken. And then, King Edward made a decision that shocked the world. He gave up the throne. He abdicated, which means he stepped down as king. He said he could not carry out his duties as king without the woman he loved by his side. So, he left the crown behind for love. Now, guess who had to take the throne? His younger brother, Prince Albert, Elizabeth's father. Prince Albert didn't want to be king. He was shy and had a stutter that made public speaking very difficult. But he accepted his duty. He chose the name King George VI to honor his father and bring stability to the country. Suddenly, Elizabeth was no longer just a princess. She was the heir to the throne, the future Queen of England. This was the moment her life changed forever. Her royal education now became even more serious. She began receiving lessons in constitutional history, law, and diplomacy. She met with important political leaders, including Prime Minister Winston Churchill. She listened closely and asked thoughtful questions. Slowly, she was being shaped into a leader, but she was still a child. She still played with her sister, loved her dogs, and enjoyed riding horses. She was quiet, well-behaved, and observant. Many people who met her as a young girl said she had a deep sense of responsibility, even then. And while the world outside was changing, especially with the tensions rising in Europe before World War II, Elizabeth was quietly preparing for a life that she never asked for, but would fully accept. By the end of this chapter in her life, Elizabeth was no longer just a royal child in the background. She had become a symbol of the future, a future that would demand strength, courage, and wisdom. And all of this started because of one unexpected decision: a king who gave up his crown for love. This single moment pushed a young girl into the path of destiny, a destiny that would change her life and history forever. Are you ready to see how this girl, who once played dress-up with her sister, became a wartime princess and a symbol of national hope? Let's move on to Chapter 2, because the story is just getting started. Chapter 2: War, Courage, and a Promise to Her People. As the 1930s came to an end, the world was heading toward a dark time. In 1939, World War II began. Millions of people across Europe, including in the United Kingdom, were facing fear, loss, and uncertainty. For Princess Elizabeth, now a teenager, this war was not something far away. It was right outside her palace doors. It would shape her life, her values, and even her future as queen. At just 13 years old, Elizabeth experienced her country going to war. Cities were being bombed, families were torn apart, and children were being sent away from their homes for safety. But instead of hiding behind royal walls, Elizabeth wanted to help. Even as a young girl, she understood something important. She was not just a princess. She was a symbol of strength for the people. In 1940, when she was only 14 years old, Elizabeth gave her first public speech. She spoke on the radio during a special program for children who had been evacuated from their homes. Her voice was soft but clear. Her message was simple but powerful. She said, "We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers, and airmen." It was a moment of comfort for the nation. A young princess speaking directly to children, giving them hope during a terrible time. But she didn't stop there. As the war went on, Elizabeth wanted to do even more. By the time she turned 18, she asked her father, King George VI, to let her join the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the women's branch of the British Army. After some discussion, he agreed. This was a big deal. She became the first female royal to join the military as an active member, not just in name, but in real service. She trained as a mechanic and a driver. She learned how to fix army trucks, change tires, and understand engines. Imagine that. A princess in overalls covered in oil, working on military vehicles alongside other young women. Her fellow trainees called her Number 230,873, Second Subaltern Elizabeth Windsor. There were no royal titles there, just hard work and dedication. This time in her life showed something very important about Elizabeth. She was willing to get her hands dirty. She didn't want special treatment. She wanted to serve, just like everyone else. As the war was coming to an end in 1945, the people of Britain celebrated victory in Europe Day, VE Day. The streets of London were full of music, dancing, and cheering. The war in Europe was finally over. Elizabeth and her sister Margaret wanted to join the celebrations, but how could two princesses walk freely in a crowd? They found a clever solution. Secretly, they left Buckingham Palace and joined the crowds outside. They walked through the city with their hats pulled low, hiding their royal faces. No one knew they were there. Elizabeth later described it as one of the most unforgettable nights of her life, a night when she could walk among her people, feel their joy, and celebrate peace side by side with them. But the most powerful moment came in 1947, when Elizabeth was just 21 years old. She gave a speech on her birthday while visiting South Africa with her parents. In that speech, she made a promise that would guide her for the rest of her life. She said, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." These words were not just a nice speech. They were a lifetime vow. She promised to serve the people, the crown, and her country, no matter what. And she kept that promise every single day until the end of her life. This chapter in her story, filled with war, courage, and public service, revealed who Elizabeth truly was. She was brave, determined, and deeply connected to her people. She did not just live in a palace, she lived through the same hard times her country faced, and she showed, through her actions, that she was ready to lead, not by command, but by example. By the time World War II ended, Elizabeth was no longer just a royal figure. She was a true symbol of resilience. She had earned the respect of millions, not just because of her title, but because of her heart. Are you ready to learn about the next chapter of her life? A story of love, marriage, and a prince who stood by her side for over 70 years? Then stay with me, because Chapter 3 is where the royal romance begins. Chapter 3: Young Love and a Royal Wedding. After years of war, sadness, and sacrifice, the world needed something to celebrate, something beautiful, hopeful, and joyful. And in the middle of this hope, there was a young princess named Elizabeth, who had fallen deeply in love with a man named Philip. Their story wasn't just a royal romance, it was a real, human love story, full of emotion, letters, waiting, and promises. Elizabeth first met Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark in 1939, when she was just 13 years old. He was 18 at the time, tall, blonde, charming, and a cadet in the British Royal Navy. Their meeting wasn't anything dramatic. He was asked to accompany the royal family during a visit to the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. But something happened that day, something small but powerful. Elizabeth noticed him, and from that moment on, her heart quietly chose him. After that meeting, they began writing letters to each other. For years, they stayed in touch through handwritten notes. These were not just royal letters. They were love letters, filled with affection and emotion. It was a secret romance, protected by paper and ink. Elizabeth kept Philip close in her thoughts, even as she served in the war and carried out royal duties. But their relationship was not easy. Philip was not considered the perfect choice by some people in the royal family. He had foreign roots, no money of his own, and a very independent personality. Many thought he wasn't traditional enough to marry a future queen, but Elizabeth didn't care. She saw in Philip what truly mattered: loyalty, strength, humor, and love. She once told her father that she would never marry anyone else. Finally, in 1946, Philip asked King George VI for Elizabeth's hand in marriage. The king agreed, but asked them to wait until Elizabeth turned 21 to make the engagement public. And so they waited, again writing letters, again keeping their love quietly strong. In July 1947, the official announcement was made. Princess Elizabeth was engaged to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten. He gave up his Greek and Danish titles and became a British citizen. He also adopted a new name, Philip Mountbatten. On November 20th, 1947, just 2 years after the end of World War II, the world witnessed a grand celebration: the royal wedding of Princess Elizabeth and Philip. It was held at Westminster Abbey, the same place where kings and queens had been crowned for centuries. Even though the country was still recovering from the war, people everywhere were excited. Millions listened to the ceremony on the radio. Women tried to copy Elizabeth's style. Her wedding dress, made of ivory silk and decorated with over 10,000 pearls, was beautiful. But it wasn't given for free. Elizabeth used ration coupons to help pay for it, just like ordinary people did. That simple act made her even more beloved. The wedding was a magical day, full of cheers, music, and smiles. Elizabeth looked calm and happy. Philip, in his naval uniform, looked proud and strong. Together they promised to stand by each other for life. No one could have known then that their marriage would last over 7 decades, one of the longest royal marriages in history. After the wedding, the couple began their new life. They lived for a short time in Malta, where Philip was stationed with the Royal Navy. These were some of Elizabeth's happiest years. For a while, she lived not just as a princess, but as a wife, quietly shopping, attending events, and enjoying private time away from the spotlight. In 1948, their first child was born, a boy named Charles. The public was overjoyed. A future king had arrived. Then in 1950, their daughter Anne was born. With 2 young children and a husband she adored, Elizabeth's life seemed full of love and balance. But this peaceful chapter wouldn't last forever. Her father, King George VI, was growing weaker. His health was failing, and the responsibilities of the crown were slowly moving toward Elizabeth. Even though she was young, it was clear that a much bigger role was coming. Still, during this time, Elizabeth and Philip's love only grew stronger. Their bond, built during war, tested by distance, and strengthened by duty, would become a pillar of her entire reign. This chapter of her life, the story of a quiet but powerful romance, reminds us that even the most royal hearts are still human. Elizabeth didn't just find a partner. She found her rock, someone who would walk beside her through history. In the next chapter, we will witness the moment that changed everything. A young wife and mother becomes the Queen of England, not by choice, but by destiny. Stay with me, because the crown is about to be passed on, and history is about to be made. Chapter 4. Becoming Queen. A new era begins. It was the early morning of February 6th, 1952, and Princess Elizabeth was thousands of miles away from home. She was on a royal tour in Kenya, standing on a treetop balcony at a beautiful lodge, watching elephants walk peacefully below. She was just 25 years old, smiling, young, and full of life. But within hours, everything would change. Her father, King George VI, had died in his sleep back in England. And in that moment, without ceremony or warning, Elizabeth was no longer a princess. She was now the Queen of the United Kingdom. The news reached her quietly. A phone call, a few whispered words, and suddenly, Elizabeth's entire life was transformed. One of the most emotional moments in modern royal history happened that day. Elizabeth, still in her travel clothes, returning from the forest in Kenya with tears in her eyes, now carrying the weight of the crown. There was no time to grieve in private, no time to prepare. As soon as she stepped off the plane in London, all eyes were on her. She was greeted not just as a daughter in mourning, but as a monarch. The world had just lost a king, and now it looked to this young woman for stability, leadership, and strength. She chose to keep the name Queen Elizabeth II in honor of the first Queen Elizabeth who had ruled centuries earlier. But this new Elizabeth would face a very different world, a world full of change, technology, and new challenges. Only 1 year later, in 1953, her coronation was held at Westminster Abbey, the same place where she had been married just a few years before. But this time, instead of a white dress and flowers, she wore the crown jewels of the nation and carried the scepter and orb, ancient symbols of royal power. The coronation was not just historic, it was revolutionary. For the first time ever, it was broadcast live on television. Over 20 million people in the UK watched from their homes. Millions more watched around the world. This was something that had never been done before. Many royal advisors were against it, worried that the sacred ceremony should stay private. But Elizabeth agreed to it because she believed the people deserved to be part of it. She was already beginning to show her desire to modernize the monarchy. The world watched as this young woman sat alone, solemn and strong, as the crown was placed on her head. The image was unforgettable. A 25-year-old queen, eyes full of focus and strength, stepping into one of the most ancient roles in history, with grace and quiet power. But becoming queen was not just about wearing a crown. It meant accepting responsibility for a commonwealth of nations, not just the UK. It meant meeting with prime ministers, presidents, kings, and queens, and keeping peace during times of crisis. And it meant giving up a normal life. Forever. It wasn't easy. Elizabeth was now both a mother and a monarch. She had to leave her young children, Charles and Anne, for long official trips. She had to smile when she was tired, speak when she was grieving, and always appear calm, even when things were difficult. But from the very beginning, Queen Elizabeth showed something rare: discipline and devotion. She knew that people needed to see their queen as a constant, someone who didn't change with the news or the mood of the day. And so, She became that symbol, strong, silent, steady. This early part of her reign also showed her deep belief in service. She kept up a busy schedule, visited schools, hospitals, and factories, and met people from all walks of life. She shook thousands of hands, gave speeches, opened parliament, and quietly built trust with her people. She also began to make small but powerful changes inside the monarchy. She allowed cameras into the royal household for the first time. She began using television as a tool to reach the public, and she gave space for her family members to begin their own roles in royal life. These small steps were the beginning of a modern royal family. But even as things changed, she stayed rooted in her famous promise. My whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. And now, with the crown on her head, that promise was more real than ever. Elizabeth had stepped into her role with strength and humility. A young wife and mother had now become the leader of a nation and a symbol to the world. But life at the top was not always peaceful. In the next chapter, we will see how Queen Elizabeth faced family challenges, public criticism, and global changes, and how she remained strong through it all. Stay with me, because the story is about to get even more dramatic. Chapter 5: Trials, Tragedies, and Triumphs. As the years passed, Queen Elizabeth II became a powerful symbol of tradition and stability. She was respected by leaders, admired by the public, and loved for her dedication. But even queens are not protected from pain. Behind the palace walls, Elizabeth faced many challenges, both public and personal. This chapter in her story is not about fairy tales. It's about real life, about facing trials, tragedies, and criticism, and rising above them with quiet strength. Let's begin with the 1990s, a time that many say was the most difficult decade of her reign. The royal family was no longer just admired. It was now the focus of the global media. Newspapers, magazines, and television channels reported on every detail of their lives, and the world began to see that even royalty could experience heartbreak, scandal, and loss. One of the biggest sources of stress for Queen Elizabeth was the marriages of her children, divorced in the same year. Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson separated. Princess Anne divorced her husband. And worst of all, the marriage between Prince Charles and Princess Diana, the future king and the beloved People's Princess, was falling apart right in front of the world. The media followed every argument, every public appearance, and every interview. People began to question the royal family. Some felt the monarchy was out of touch, cold, and outdated. The Queen remained silent, as she always had, but the pressure was building. Then, something tragic happened that changed everything. On August 31st, 1997, Princess Diana died in a car crash in Paris. She was only 36. The news shocked the entire world. Millions of people cried. They left flowers outside Buckingham Palace. They lit candles. They mourned deeply. But there was one thing that made the sadness turn into anger. The Queen remained silent. For several days, the royal family stayed at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, away from London. People were confused. Why wasn't the Queen speaking? Why wasn't the flag at half-mast? Why weren't there public statements? The truth was, Queen Elizabeth was trying to protect her grandsons, William and Harry, who had just lost their mother. She believed they needed space, love, and time, not cameras or microphones. But the public wanted to hear from their queen. They needed comfort. And finally, Elizabeth responded. She gave a rare and powerful speech on live television. Standing in black, she spoke from the heart. "What I say to you now as your queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart." She praised Diana's warmth, her energy, her love for her sons, and her impact on the world. It was a moment of healing. The Queen's words helped bring peace to a grieving nation. And though she was criticized at first, many later admired her quiet dignity and her deep care for her family. But that wasn't the only hard moment in those years. In 1992, the same year her children's marriages were falling apart, a massive fire broke out at Windsor Castle, her beloved home. Over 100 rooms were destroyed. The damage was not just physical, it felt like a symbol of the chaos the royal family was facing. That same year, in a speech, the Queen called 1992 her Annus Horribilis, which means horrible year in Latin. It was the first time the world heard her speak so openly about her personal pain. Despite all this, she did not step away from her role. She didn't complain. She didn't run. She stayed. And over the years, her resilience became one of her most powerful qualities. When people criticized her, she listened, adjusted, and moved forward. She slowly opened up the royal family to more media access. She allowed documentaries. She modernized royal traditions. She even began paying taxes, something previous monarchs hadn't done. These changes helped repair the public's trust. As the world entered the 2000s and beyond, Elizabeth continued to serve. She remained calm during political changes, wars, financial crises, and even a global pandemic. She became known not for flashy speeches, but for her consistency, her duty, and her quiet leadership. In truth, it was her ability to face difficulty, not avoid it, that made her so respected. She showed that being a leader doesn't mean being perfect. It means showing up every day, no matter what's happening, and serving with honor. Through loss, through fire, through public scandal, Queen Elizabeth never stopped. And in doing so, she kept the monarchy alive, modern, and meaningful in a changing world. But her journey was not yet finished. In the final chapter of her incredible life, we'll see how she spent her last years, still smiling, still working, and still inspiring, even after saying goodbye to her beloved husband, Prince Philip. Stay with me, because Chapter 6 is a story of love, legacy, and one final farewell. Chapter 6: The Final Years, a Legacy of Grace. As time moved on, Queen Elizabeth II entered the final and most reflective years of her remarkable reign. She had served her country and the world for more than 7 decades, longer than any other British monarch in history. These last years were filled with moments that showed her strength, grace, and deep connection to her people, even as age and loss touched her life. One of the most shining moments of her later years was her Platinum Jubilee in 2022, celebrating 70 years on the throne. Imagine that. 7 decades of leadership, service, and devotion. It was a moment of joy and celebration, not just in the UK, but across the world. Streets were decorated with flags, huge parties were held, and millions of people watched special events honoring their queen. The Platinum Jubilee showed the deep respect and affection people still had for Elizabeth, even after all the challenges she had faced. But just before this historic celebration, Elizabeth faced a heartbreaking personal loss: the death of her husband, Prince Philip. Philip had been by her side for over 70 years, through wars, celebrations, family troubles, and countless royal duties. They had one of the longest marriages in royal history, a true partnership built on love, loyalty, and mutual support. Philip passed away peacefully in April 2021 at the age of 99. The Queen was deeply saddened, but showed incredible strength in her public appearances afterward. She continued to carry out her duties with the same quiet determination that had defined her life. Her farewell to Philip was a reminder to the world of the power of love and devotion, a love that had lasted a lifetime. During the difficult times of the COVID-19 pandemic, Queen Elizabeth once again connected deeply with her people. In April 2020, she gave a rare televised speech directly to the nation. In calm, reassuring words, she said, "We will meet again." These simple words, echoing the famous song from World War II, gave millions of people hope during a frightening time. Her message reminded everyone that even in the darkest moments, unity and courage could bring light. It was a perfect example of her ability to comfort and inspire through silence, through presence, and through the power of words. Though age slowed her down, the Queen remained active and present in public life. She made her final public appearances with grace, sometimes frail, often smiling, always composed. The world watched as she attended events, met with leaders, and supported causes that had been important to her throughout her reign. Then, on September 8, 2022, Queen Elizabeth passed away peacefully at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. The news shocked and saddened millions around the globe. It was the end of an era, but the world's response showed just how much she had meant to so many people. The mourning was deep and worldwide. Flags flew at half-mast. Memorials were held in cities across continents. People lined the streets of London to pay their respects as her coffin traveled through the city. The Queen's funeral was watched by billions, a final historic moment uniting people of different countries, cultures, and generations. Her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, the royal family, promised to carry forward her legacy. Her son, King Charles III, ascended to the throne, continuing the line she had worked so hard to protect. But Elizabeth's influence stretched far beyond titles and crowns. She had become a symbol of resilience, duty, and grace. What made Queen Elizabeth truly unforgettable was not just the length of her reign or the power she held. It was her character, her quiet strength in the face of hardship, her devotion to service, and her ability to connect with people across the world. She showed that being a leader is about more than decisions and ceremonies. It is about heart, patience, and perseverance. Throughout her life, Elizabeth inspired millions by living her promise. "My whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." And she kept that promise every day. Her story teaches us about courage in hard times, love that lasts a lifetime, and the power of hope. Queen Elizabeth's legacy is alive today. In the family she raised, the people she inspired, and the history she shaped. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the life of one of the most remarkable women in history. If you found this story inspiring, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment sharing what you found most amazing about Queen Elizabeth's life. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.